If the road you're on feels crowded, you're probably walking toward approval, not truth, because remember, lions don't follow crowds, and the right path is rarely busy. People often ask why choosing the right path feels lonely, why standing for truth separates you instead of surrounding you with support. Ibn Arabi reminds us that the seeker of the real must walk beyond the noise of the world. And the moment you step beyond noise, you step beyond the crowd. In today's world, everyone is chasing validation, likes, applause, recognition, acceptance. But Ibn Arabi warns that the more you depend on people, the further you drift from yourself. The crowd can give you approval, but it cannot give you purpose. It can give you attention, but it cannot give you depth. It can give you company, but it cannot give you identity. The truth is this: you cannot walk a path built for your soul while dragging along people who don't even understand your direction. That's why the journey becomes silent. That's why companions disappear. That's why footsteps around you fade. Ibn Arabi said, "The one who travels inward must walk alone, for no one else knows the way." Solitude isn't a punishment, it's an awakening. It's the moment the heart finally hears its own voice. Great thinkers echoed the same truth. Nietzsche said, "The individual must always fight to avoid being swallowed by the group." Rumi said, "Seek those who fan your fire." But Ibn Arabi went deeper. If no one fuels your flame, walk with the one who lit it. Many people fear being alone. They fear being misunderstood. They fear losing acceptance. But Ibn Arabi teaches that when you step into truth, people fall away the way shadows vanish when light intensifies. Not everyone is meant to go where you are going. Not everyone is meant to grow at your pace. Not everyone is meant to see what your heart sees. You will lose friends. You will lose approval. You will lose comfort. But you will gain clarity. You will gain strength. You will gain your real self. The right path isn't crowded because truth isn't popular. People prefer comfort over transformation, noise over silence, illusions over awakening. And that's why those who choose truth must carry the courage to stand alone. Ibn Arabi said, "To stand in truth, you must be willing to be apart from what is false." This is why the path becomes narrow. This is why companions become few. This is why the journey feels solitary, because lions don't move in herds. They walk alone with calm authority, not desperate noise. They don't need a crowd to confirm their power. Their existence itself is the confirmation. So if you feel alone today, don't mistake it for weakness. Don't mistake it for failure. Don't mistake it for loss. It is a sign that you have finally stepped into the path that belongs to you, not the one given to you by people. Walk alone when you must. Stand alone when you must. Because the truth doesn't reward the crowd. It rewards the courageous. And when your heart finally reaches clarity, you will realize you are never alone. You are simply walking with truth. When a person finally chooses truth, the very first thing they encounter is separation, because truth does not come to those who want comfort. It comes to those who are willing to lose what is false in order to find what is real. And this separation feels like loneliness at first, because you are stepping out of patterns that kept you surrounded, disconnected, stepping out of expectations that kept you accepted but not authentic, stepping out of identities that kept you visible but not alive. And Ibn Arabi reminds us that transformation begins the moment a person stops outsourcing their direction to the world and starts listening to the whisper inside the heart, a whisper that is softer than noise but stronger than fear. And the moment you listen to that whisper, you begin to detach from the crowd that once shaped you. And this detachment is painful, not because you are losing people, but because you are shedding versions of yourself that were built for belonging rather than becoming. And the world will not applaud this shift, because the world feels safer when you remain predictable, familiar, compliant. But truth demands you leave the familiar city of illusions and step onto the road only the brave ones walk. And this road has always been walked alone, because only you can carry your soul across it. Only you can face the storms written for your growth. Only you can walk the distance between who you are and who you could be. and this walk cannot be shared even if someone loves you, because no one else has your wounds, your lessons, your purpose, or your inner map. And Ibn Arabi says that the seeker must detach from anything that keeps them from the real, and most people don't realize that what keeps them from the real is not always sin or failure, but dependence on the crowd, fear of disapproval, addiction to belonging. And these chains are heavier than iron because they restrain not the body, but the soul. And when you break them, the world will call you alone, but the truth calls you awake. And awakening always feels like isolation before it feels like liberation, because the mind needs silence to untangle itself, the heart needs stillness to hear what is true, and the soul needs space to remember its origin. And this space is not found in crowds, but in courage. Courage to disappoint others rather than betray your inner knowing. Courage to lose the applause rather than lose your alignment. Courage to walk forward without a map drawn by others, because the path of truth is not lit by popularity, but by sincerity. And sincerity has always been rare because it does not bend for acceptance. It does not trade authenticity for attention. It does not abandon truth to keep peace. And those who embrace sincerity find themselves walking through a landscape where companions grow fewer, not because others are unworthy, but because the journey becomes too deep for the shallow, too real for the fearful, too honest for the pretenders. And in these moments you begin to understand why lions walk alone, not out of arrogance, but out of integrity, not because companionship is bad, but because most companions cannot survive high altitudes. And the path of truth is an ascent, every step taking you higher into clarity and further from the illusions you once called home. And at this altitude the air becomes thin. Shallow intentions cannot breathe, borrowed identities cannot survive, and the crowd cannot follow you because they are built for comfort, not elevation. And as you rise, you begin to feel the strange peace of solitude, a peace that does not depend on who stays or who leaves, a peace that comes from knowing you are finally walking in alignment with your soul. And alignment is louder than applause, stronger than company, deeper than support, because when you align with truth, you begin to feel accompanied by something greater than the crowd, a presence that cannot be seen, but can be felt, a guidance that cannot be explained, but can be trusted. And this presence is why those who walk alone never truly walk alone. And though the journey begins with separation, it ends with elevation. And in that elevation, you realize the truth was not taking people from you. The truth was returning you to yourself. Crowd gives noise, but never clarity. And this is one of the greatest challenges for anyone who seeks truth, because humans are naturally social creatures and we are wired to seek validation, acceptance, and approval. Yet Ibn Arabi reminds us that the more we allow the crowd to shape our thoughts, decisions, and sense of self, the further we drift from the essence of who we are. And the essence of truth is always singular, personal, and uncheckable. It does not conform to the patterns of majority opinion. It does not bend under the weight of collective fear, and it cannot be diluted by shallow approval. Yet so many of us spend our lives surrounded by people, conversations, and influences that constantly demand attention, approval, and alignment with opinions. And in this environment, it becomes increasingly difficult to hear the inner voice that is whispering guidance, wisdom, and direction, because the human heart is like a delicate instrument and every loud voice outside competes with its subtle resonance. And the subtle voice of the soul cannot fight against noise with noise. It can only be heard when the world quiets enough for reflection, when the mind stops seeking validation, and when the heart learns to trust itself. And Ibn Arabi teaches that the seeker of truth must cultivate the skill to listen deeply, to discern between the voices that are meant to guide and the voices that are meant to distract, because the crowd often speaks from fear, habit, or misunderstanding, and even those who mean well can unknowingly lead a seeker away from clarity. And this is why solitude is so essential for anyone pursuing authenticity, because in solitude the noise fades, The chatter of approval and disapproval is removed, and the soul finds space to remember its own rhythm, its own desires, and its own alignment with truth. Yet solitude does not mean isolation. It means intentional separation from distractions that compromise integrity, from influences that encourage compromise, and from people whose presence reinforces conformity rather than authenticity. And the crowd may offer companionship, recognition, and temporary comfort, but it can never provide the uncheckable clarity that arises when a heart stands alone and listens. And clarity is not something that can be measured by applause, agreement, or attention. It is a felt experience, a deep knowing that emerges when the mind stops rationalizing and the heart stops hesitating. And the crowd cannot create that knowing because the crowd itself is fragmented, divided, and driven by external pressures. So when a person begins to follow the truth rather than follow approval, they often feel estranged, misunderstood, and even rejected, because the collective mind is rarely aligned with what a solitude is the home of the strong, because true strength does not rely on numbers, applause, or approval. It relies on alignment with one's inner truth. And Ibn Arabi teaches that the heart must become a place of unwavering presence, a sanctuary where clarity and purpose are cultivated away from the influence of the crowd. Because when a person walks in alignment with truth, the world around them often appears confusing, loud, and even hostile. And this is not a reflection of the individual's failure, but of the rarity of those who can perceive reality beyond collective illusions. The soul needs space to breathe, to understand its own rhythm, to feel its own pulse without being drowned in the noise of other hearts. And this space is not accidental. It is intentionally carved through discipline, courage, and the willingness to accept separation. Because every step toward truth asks for release of attachment, release of the need for validation, release of the expectation that others must understand. And those who cannot endure this release will cling to companionship at the cost of authenticity. And the strong recognize that such attachment is bondage, a subtle chain that limits growth, dims clarity, and softens the edge of their power. And Ibn Arabi's wisdom reminds us that the traveler of the inner path must sometimes walk alone, not because isolation is the goal, but because the journey requires depth, focus, and a heart that is undistracted by voices that do not serve its purpose. Strength is therefore cultivated in quiet moments of reflection, in facing fear without reassurance, in making decisions without external validation, and in holding the line of integrity when the majority would bend. And the strong know that companionship is valuable but secondary, because the real power comes from mastery over oneself, mastery over impulses, and mastery over the subtle fears that arise when one stands apart. And this mastery cannot be borrowed from others. It cannot be learned in a classroom. It cannot be experienced vicariously. It must be lived, felt, tested, and honed in the solitude of the journey. And every lion walks alone, not to punish itself, but to honor the strength that resides within. Strength that cannot be measured in numbers, but can be measured in resilience, clarity, and the unwavering courage to face reality as it is. And the path of solitude also teaches patience, because the strong understand that timing is sacred, that growth is gradual, and that the rewards of alignment are not immediate but unfold according to a rhythm deeper than ambition, external success, or the transient approval of crowds. And in solitude the strong learn the art of listening, truly listening, not just to the world but to themselves, to their own intuition, their own conscience, and their own divine guidance. And this listening cultivates discernment, allowing the heart to differentiate between distractions and signals, illusions and realities, fear and guidance. And in this cultivated discernment, the soul develops resilience, the ability to endure hardship, disappointment, and misunderstanding without losing center, because the strong know that external circumstances are always shifting, always unpredictable, but the inner foundation built through solitude, self-mastery, and unwavering alignment with truth is unshakable. And this foundation allows them to act decisively, speak clearly, and move with confidence even when the path ahead is unseen. The strong also understand the paradox of companionship, that it is both precious and potentially distracting, and thus they choose relationships that enhance growth rather than merely comfort. They choose presence over quantity, depth over popularity, and authenticity over approval. And in this way, solitude becomes a tool, not a punishment, a crucible in which character, courage, and clarity are forged, and the lessons learned in isolation are carried forward not as arrogance, but as wisdom, allowing the strong to engage with the world from a place of groundedness, not dependence. And Ibn Arabi teaches that the heart that has known its own rhythm and strength does not fear the absence of crowds, because it knows that true companionship comes from alignment with the real, from walking in truth, and from cultivating a presence that does not need validation to exist. And so the home of the strong is not built of crowds, applause, or approval. It is built of solitude, discipline, clarity, and the courage to be fully oneself. Right path is not crowded because truth has always been rare, and those who pursue it must accept that the journey itself demands courage, discipline, and a willingness to stand apart from the majority. Ibn Arabi teaches that the seekers of the real cannot rely on numbers, popularity, or agreement to validate their path, because the essence of truth is singular, personal, and uncheckable, and the right path requires alignment with the soul rather than conformity with the crowd. Most people are drawn to comfort, safety, and familiarity, and they prefer the easy company of the crowd rather than the difficult clarity of truth. This is why those who walk authentically are often misunderstood, criticized, or even rejected. Yet the rejection is not a punishment, but a natural filter that separates those who are willing to grow from those who are content with illusions. The sacredness of the path is revealed precisely in its solitude, because when companions are few, the seeker is forced to confront their own heart, to examine their intentions, to discern what is real and what is superficial. And this confrontation is not comfortable, but it is necessary for depth, integrity, and inner clarity. The crowd can offer noise, distraction, and temporary comfort, but it cannot offer the stillness required to listen to the subtle guidance of the soul. It cannot provide the inner resonance that confirms alignment, and it cannot challenge the seeker to rise above fear, attachment, and pretense. The right path demands that one move forward even when approval is absent, even when recognition is delayed, and even when companionship is minimal, because the growth that comes from walking alone is deeper, more resilient, and more authentic than the growth that comes from following the familiar or the popular. Ibn Arabi says that the heart that is anchored in truth does not waver because of external opinion, because its foundation is internal, divine, and unshakable, and this foundation allows the seeker to act decisively, speak honestly, and choose authenticity over acceptance without hesitation. The scarcity of companions is also a reminder that the path is sacred, that it is not meant for convenience, and that it is designed to refine the soul through experience rather than comfort. Those who embrace the solitude required by truth begin to develop qualities that cannot be acquired in crowds, such as discernment, patience, courage, resilience, and inner clarity. The right path is therefore not crowded because it is selective by nature. It is designed to challenge, to elevate, and to purify, and those who remain on it despite loneliness demonstrate a maturity, strength, and understanding that is inaccessible to the uncommitted. The sacredness of walking the right path also lies in its alignment with higher principles rather than worldly metrics. The seeker learns that fulfillment comes not from popularity, wealth, or external validation, but from integrity, presence, and harmony with the deeper reality that guides all existence. And Ibn Arabi reminds us that those who walk the sacred path may appear isolated, but in reality they are accompanied by truth itself, a presence that is constant, eternal, and infinitely supportive, because the sacred path is not measured by the quantity of companions, but by the quality of alignment, depth of insight, and commitment to authenticity. The rarity of companions serves as a mirror reflecting the necessity of self-reliance, the development of inner authority, and the cultivation of spiritual resilience. The right path also teaches that disappointment, rejection, and solitude are tools rather than punishments, that the absence of crowd approval forces the seeker to rely on their own discernment and strengthens the capacity to trust intuition, reason, and the subtle guidance of the heart. The sacred path requires one to walk without expectation of external reward, without dependence on validation, and without distraction from superficial relationships, because truth does not need confirmation, clarity does not need popularity, and the soul does not need crowds to know its direction. Those who embrace this reality begin to feel a sense of liberation even in isolation, a deep calm that comes from knowing that walking alone is walking rightly, that solitude is not abandonment but that preparation, and that every step taken in alignment with truth builds resilience, wisdom, and courage. Ibn Arabi teaches that the path is sacred because it is transformative. It is not a road of ease or convenience, but a road that shapes the soul through experience, reflection, and self-mastery. And this shaping cannot be done in the presence of the crowd, because crowds tend to perpetuate mediocrity, conformity, and distraction. The right path remains uncrowded because it demands that the seeker rise above fear, attachment, and the superficial allure of comfort. It asks for perseverance, courage, and unwavering commitment to inner knowing. And those who remain on the path learn that sacredness is inseparable from solitude, that authenticity is inseparable from courage, and that alignment with truth is inseparable from the willingness to walk alone.